All right, it's five past the hour, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Robert Katzschmann. He's an assistant professor at ETH Zurich, where he leads the soft robotics lab. Rob is our alumni, and he got his PhD from mechanical engineering in 2018, after which he worked as the CTO in tactile robotics and also as a senior applied scientist in Amazon Robotics. He has published multiple high-impact papers, and they're very interesting work, such as 3D printing based on light in Nature and electrohydraulic muscles. And his work appeared in multiple news outlets, such as BBC and New York Times. I also want to mention that Rob has studied and worked in multiple countries and in multiple robotics area. And one thing that he particularly interested in was thinking about how soft systems can safely interact with humans and environment. His work draws inspiration from biology to create lifelike, adaptive robot from compliant and soft materials. With that, Rob, the floor is yours, and we very much look to your talk.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be back. I remember the seminar series to be over in the Status Center. Now it has moved into this new building that didn't even exist when I was here. There was, like, I guess, a parking lot or some old building here before. So you're very privileged to have this new college. That's great. I'm going to bring you a bit overseas, basically, the work that we've been doing at ETH in the last 4.5 years since I started there. I want to convince you today of the idea of building more lifelike robots. So if you're not already doing this, I hope you walk out of here and you might think about going in this direction of taking more bio-inspiration into your robotics work. So let me start off with this question. Where do you think robots already help you in your daily lives? Or maybe help your friends and your colleagues at work or at home? What comes to your mind when you think of a robot that actually helps you, like a product that's out there? Roomba, okay. Something else? Yes? Okay, Amazon Active, okay, good. So I'm waiting for the dishwashing machine because the last few days I've been giving this talk, and every single time someone said dishwasher as the first answer. So, and I always said I don't think it's a robot, but okay. So I think, yes, definitely. There is something like a factory that could be in that area or an Amazon warehouse. There could be the Roomba or a similar type of vacuum robot at home. Or there could be, I'm a bit biased here, there could be a quadruped. I took the one that we have in Zurich. But they are actually being sold, and there's a market where they are selling them, maybe on the order of 1,000. I just spoke to a friend from BD last night, and he said they have about 1,000 of them, the Spot Minis, about 1,000 of them actually actively deployed. And it's a service system, so it's not just a robot, it's the full service that they provide. And this is great. This stuff is really making an impact, and I think there's a lot of value to this. So I don't want to undermine the value of these electromagnetically driven robots. But now let me get to this point. There is an author, her name is Joanna Maciejewska. And you might have seen this. This was a tweet that she made earlier this year, where she said, you know what's the biggest problem with pushing all things AI? Wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do the art and writing. Not for AI to do my art and writing, she writes a lot of books, so that I can do my laundry and dishes. So she really wants to not have that happening, right? So she thinks, hey guys, you great engineers and machine learning scientists, can you not build me a robot that does all of that like daily chore work? And if you think about this, it is a really hard problem. I mean, also Boston Dynamics has been trying to tackle this for a while. Like, what are the real issues here? If you want to do something like, let's say, handling of bakery items, that happens a lot. There's a lot of like decentralized locations all across the world where you bake bakery items, and then a human has to handle them. Not everything can be automated there. The same way, your surgery is still done by a human hand. And that human hand is miraculous, that what it can do. In the same way, also, if you go into a warehouse, for example, or in an Amazon logistics center, the humans are still doing all of this manipulation of the items. And similarly, in your supermarkets. Who put up all of that stuff in that shelf? It was a human. And you take it out again and make them do it over and over again. So there is really this interaction. And the question is, why is it so hard to make an embodied AI that can interact with the world? Why do you think? What do you think makes it so difficult? So I think people are already interested, and they think it is possible. You see it here. This is Boston Dynamics on the left, the new Atlas. On the right, you see Figure from Figure AI. They're actually building robots that want to do this. They want to interact with the world. They have something that moves around, and they actually interaction. They combine it with an AI. And there's actually billions of valuations going into this. You've seen it recently. Companies getting a lot of money for trying to really scale this. But now comes the difficult part. It's not hopping. Come on. It's loading. OK, give it a second. I'm assuming it's crashing. So as it's loading, the problem with this here really is, and I will show you this in a second, the problem is these robots are built of steel and metal and mechanistic machines. So there you go. Now it's playing. So really the problem, what I'm trying to bring across is, with such a machine design, you don't want to be close to it. It can be quite unsafe, and it can be quite scary to have such a robot. And not only this, I also think it is definitely the wrong direction, because if I have a metal machine with the lack of compliance, how I'm going to do all of this dexterous surgery, how I'm going to handle all of these different items, I think it's going to be really difficult. I cannot just compensate all of this with AI only. So what I really think is, I don't think these designs are ready to safely interact with the world. And I also don't think they will be the really right solution for these tasks I was trying to show you earlier. So we need to rethink the robot's morphology. We really need to think about how could we build robots in a very different way to potentially make them capable of interacting, but also to solve many other problems along the way. So I have been looking with my group into this question of building musculoskeletal designs. We are interested in this question of how can we bring together the best of multiple worlds. So here we are looking into what have people done in soft robotics, of like using, for the sake of softness, using soft materials such as silicone elastomers and other rubber-like materials to build robots, robotic hands, and so forth. They lack the ability to lift a load. So the rigid robots can do this. They can lift a lot of loads. They can be capable of operating in a gravitational-based environment. So soft robots work well maybe underwater, but once I put them out of the water, I have to have some backbone. And then there's nature. Nature has fortunately the advantage that for a natural design, you can have a lot of flexibility in how you move it, plus you can have a payload capacity as well. So that really brings us to this point of, can we start designing systems that combine the best of these three worlds? Something that has the ability to be soft where it needs to be soft, but also to be rigid and stiff and payload capable. And that's what I'm trying to bring across today. So what I'm going to cover. So we will first talk a bit about biohybrid robots and how we've been looking into the most, in my opinion, the most extreme case of trying to build these bio-inspired systems. And then we look into how to scale them potentially up and what directions we need to take. And I will bring you one example of how this is not only important from a robotics perspective, but also has impact from a medical perspective. And then I will go into the topic of electric muscles. Such as Kevin had already mentioned this, we have also been looking into the way of building robots using an electric muscle that can contract and actually be that building block of a robot, and then look into how we can further evolve this technology to be untethered so it doesn't have to rely on bulky power supplies and so forth. Then I will talk about how to build the skeleton and everything else of this robot using a printing method. And finally, we will talk a bit about autonomy and how to make these robotic hands capable of really showcasing what they are good in, being musculoskeletal, compliant design, and doing something autonomous. But before I get into this, let me first start off with, this is the team who actually did the work. That's the team I've been privileged to work with every day. And I'm very glad that I was able to start at ETH and was given the means. And so what you will see today, is a group of people from biology all the way to computer science that works in a soft robotics lab. So what can we potentially take inspiration from? I brought you not just two examples. I could bring you 100 different examples. Let's start off with the hand and with an arm. we have one thing that moves it all, which is the muscle. The muscle moves our arm around, it moves our fingers around. We have a lot of muscles in our forearm. If you go rock climbing, you get a pump in there. This is really what makes the powering of your body. Then we have the bones. That is really there for the payload capacity and for being strong enough to survive and do things. Actually, in the real world, we have the tendons, the joints, the ligaments. And what I'm not showing here, you obviously also have other connective tissue. You have skin and so forth. And so we should take inspiration from this. We shouldn't necessarily try to build all of this completely like biology does, but we should try to learn from these aspects. And one thing we've started doing are muscles first and foremost, because if I want to make a robot, it has to move. If I don't have something that moves around, it's at best a sensing system. So the first thing, I already mentioned this, what we decided to, well, we'll talk about is how we can use cells to engineer a living robot. And really talking about, can cells become an engineering material? If we figure out cells as a building block and we can make that a bit more reproducible so we can start building systems over and over with this. And why? Why would you want to use cells? It sounds messy, it sounds complicated, but it potentially has some advantages. Here I'm just trying to outline a few of them, like it could potentially be self-healing, self-repairing, because it's already built into its DNA to do this. The same way it could be self-assembling, or it is self-assembling. And if we figure out ways of making it more sustainable and compliant, it has the potential to be that. It has the potential to maybe eventually one day only rely on resources that are actually not coming, let's say, from an animal source in terms of nutrients, but from a natural cradle-to-cradle resource, something that we can feed to these cells to actually power them. And then when the robot eventually is not working anymore, we could just put it back onto compost and let it degrade. So here is a bit of like a visualization to bring across to you how does this actually work. So this is a muscle. If you dive deeper in the muscle, you get down to the basic ingredients, which is a myoplast. And these myoplasts is what we are using when we're doing basically biohybrid tissue engineering. So we're using these myoplasts, we're combining them with hydrogels. And in the end, what we do is these hydrogels become, depending on what technique we use and how we are giving them certain cues, they can form eventually muscle fibers, or small, in this case, myofibers that we can use to make a contractive muscle. So with this in mind as a starting point, so just to give you an idea, this is as a first part of what we're trying to do to build a muscle. We can use different techniques to achieve this. So one way of doing this is we could do micromolding. So this is something where we just mold the muscle into shape. Or we could do light-based bioprinting as another method where instead of molding it, we take a hydrogel and we shine UV light on it, and then it polymerizes selectively, and with this we can build also a construct that is selectively made. Or we can use something called extrusion-based material printing. Here you have, you know this principle from FDM printing. Here we would have multiple nozzles, and you can inject different inks into it, and then you can make a construct from that. So with this in mind, one thing that my students Aish to get started off, she picked up a really nice Nature protocol from Rito, who is here today. And we have to say it was one of the really few protocols that we could actually follow at the time when we got started that actually worked. And I don't necessarily want to blame only maybe the poor writing down of the protocols, but it worked for us, given also what we could, for example, get from suppliers in terms of cells and of synthetic materials. And so what we started doing is we weight these rings because we knew it was working. It was working for Rito, it was working for others, so we started there. Then we transferred these rings onto these constructs that we printed separately. And then we had a little playground to get started with. These are these muscle rings, and when you apply an electric field to them, you see the electrode on the right side of this video, then you can trigger them and make them contract as a muscle. And in the end, what that meant is we could then go, for example, ahead and start investigating the modeling of these muscles and start trying to understand, can we model what we see there? Can we understand why it contracts this way? So that was what Manuel got interested in, of looking into what does it mean to have a saturated versus an unsaturated contraction of this muscle ring? And can we now match this with the actual physical ring? So this is work in progress, where we are looking into different levels of activation level from the electrical stimulus will cause different responses on that muscle ring. So this is something that we are just getting started on, but I just want to give you a glimpse. I think there's a lot of potential to try to build good modeling systems that explain the behavior of these muscles to minimize the time spent in the biolab of iterating over designs and coming up with designs faster, because we spend a lot of time in the biolab. Why don't we want to learn something from something working to then inspire the next design from this? So then Miriam and the team, she started thinking about, can we make a closed loop muscle? So can we make one muscle, have something that senses locally the contraction, and then use that contraction signal to close the loop and control how much we are contracting. And so this is the top view of the petri dish of this muscle construct. The ring is in the center. And on the side, you basically have this here, which is a soft strain sensor, which is a flexible fiber that we integrated here. And what we then end up doing is we have the bioactuator, and now we're looking from one side. We have this fiber coming into the bioactuator. And as you're giving it a stimulus, it causes an extension of that other part, of the non-living part of this sensor. And then we can use this to actually trigger a signal and control the contraction in a closed loop. This is just to quickly give you an idea of, this is something that we start to get interested in. Can we make something that's not vision-based, but actually proprioceptively in the muscle? And this is not really a robot yet, it's just a muscle. To make a robot, we need to make something move around, and not just on the spot. So what we then started doing is, we started picking up a method. This goes back to the slide I just showed you. We used the volumetric printing method, specifically a method called xolography. Xolography uses two wavelengths of light. These two wavelengths of light only work in that construct because we have something called a dual photoinitiator. The photoinitiator in this volumetric printing process is crucial to polymerize. So in this case, we shine two wavelengths. It brings this photoinitiator to its final radical state, and only then it polymerizes. If only one wavelength arrives, this photoinitiator will not polymerize. That's great, because now, as you can see in the image, I shine two wavelengths into this construct, and then wherever both of them hit, that's where you polymerize. So you can program the material this way by running a projector from one side that projects basically a bitmap image, and then a laser curtain from the other direction you can program into the material. Well, this is a hydrogel, so we can start putting cells into this hydrogel as well. In the first step, we started without the cells. We started just building the scaffolds and trying to see how biocompatible it is to even do tissue culturing on top of it. So we seeded Gelma, collagen, and C2C12 cells on top of these constructs. And then we end up with these scaffolds where we had our C2C12 cells, cell mix, our bioink mix on top of this. And then we start culturing it. This is how the construct looks at first, at day 0. And then after some phase of proliferation, we start eventually letting it remodel the matrix, and the whole hydrogel cell starts shrinking. And just the hydrogel of the muscle itself, not of the underlying scaffold. The underlying scaffold, it kind of grows into it a bit and connects with it, and it needs to be strong enough to do this. So here is the process, day 3, day 6, day 14. Eventually, we get this like rounded shape of a construct. And I actually got very interested in this also from the perspective of saying, well, I can actually look at different lengths of how much of this can be bended, depending on how much force I apply from this one side. It's a bilayered actuator. And what end up happening here is we can either have this really short construct on the left, which doesn't do much, or we make it longer, and it can bend properly and becomes a little swimmer. So we're talking here about 15 millimeters in length of a construct. And then here you see, if you don't get the printing process on the xolography right, you get kind of like a funky little swimmer that doesn't really do what you want it to do. And it was really a mix of putting the right scaffold material into the printing process, plus getting the printing parameters and conditions to work out well, so that they can actually survive the maturation process. So once we got that right and could survive the maturation process, we got the swimmer out here that can actually use its muscle, which you see in white, and what you see in like translucent, that's the scaffold printed with the xolography methods. So now you can look into actuating at different frequencies. If you do 1 hertz, you get some slow swimming. If you do 2 hertz, you can swim further. That's what you see here in the graph on the left. And then as you keep going up in frequency, you can swim a longer distance and travel a longer way. All the way up to 5 hertz, where you actually have the fastest swimming performance. But there's one problem here. If I want to greedily go up further, what do you think is going to happen? If I go beyond 5 hertz, in this case, what do you think is going to happen? Say again? Tetanus, yes, that's what happens. Tetanus happens. So you see a construct here cramping up. That's what it does. So you cannot just greedily go up. It doesn't. You can't. It can't recuperate fast enough. So here's the construct that I built, and it's run at 5 Hertz with a 1% duty cycle. So when we actuate, that means we are from first a 1/5 period length. Only 1% of that length we actually stimulated, and then the rest of it allows it to recover and then go back again. And this gave us, if you look at comparative swimmers made of muscles like this, or other like robots that we would compare by body lengths, we actually got a 3x improvement with just this design compared to other works before. So now, taking a step further is we are interested in, can we actually also model this swimmer behavior, not just the rings, but also such a swimmer. And the problem here is on the right side, this thing is actually not in the water. So whatever I model, I can't really make a lot of conclusions out of how well it will swim. So we had to start doing a fluid structure interaction model that really allows us to do both the swimming, the muscle, and also understand the swimming itself. So Manuel started putting this together that we can actually understand how does the muscle and the scaffold work. And we started studying the length of the muscle for different percentage length of the overall scaffold length to understand how far can I actually swim given a certain design. So this is a way of doing an initial step towards shape optimization of these swimmers and allowing us to just better understand what we should do in terms of designing these robots. So you can imagine there's lots of work to do. Manuel is currently particularly interested in building up a framework that allows you to model these robots and understanding the multi-physical aspects of this, and then we can do benchmarks with this. But one thing that we have not shown you with this work at all, or many of things are not shown yet, is the problem of that these cells actually, the constructs will actually have an issue. If I have them too big, the cells will die. So if I don't properly perfuse them, they will die. To show you this more specifically, is in here, when you have the culture medium coming to the cells from the surface, you will get nice myofibers on the side. But then inside of the construct, there's a lot of dead cells. That means you have nothing contributing to the contraction. It's just the dead part of the body. So you cannot just make this bigger and bigger and bigger without thinking about how to send nutrients to all parts of the muscle. So one first step that we took, it's quite obvious step to make, is to say we use extrusion printing to interline both the bioink with the muscles in it and something else that's an anchor structure and also a structure that acts as a perfusion channel that can be removed afterwards. So we basically produce this construct where you have the anchor that's intertwined with the muscle and with some, in white shown, things that can be washed away afterwards. And with this, at least we could start looking into how well does the culture medium go into this construct with the channel versus without the channel. And just in the interest of time, let me jump to another thing that we've been looking into. We've not only been using solography, but we're also using a method just called normal single light volumetric printing. And with this method, we can actually now make constructs that have multiple filament alignments. So not just you saw here this construct that would contract like this, or the ring that would contract. Here, we get contractions in multiple directions based on where we shine the light onto the construct. The technique we're using here is called flight, and that flight technique basically allows us to have sort of microfilaments through the printing process, and then the cells align along those microfilaments. We can get a couple of different, we can get different designs for this. So for example, here you see a construct that was just in one direction aligned, and then you can do an optical flow analysis. And here, and this is all spontaneous contraction with cardiac cells that come from a primary source. And here's an optical flow analysis of a twisted cardiac tissue where we had two wavelengths coming together like this, and then it twists like this. So finally, to kind of wrap this part up, we also been looking into this. OK, so now I'm going to show something that's bloody. Are you OK with this? OK. If you're not OK, just close your eyes for a moment. So we then took a step further, and we went away from just a pure hydrogel and trying to think about, can we make a reinforced construct that could be eventually implantable of these cardiac cells. In this case, we went away from this primary cell source from a rat sacrifice towards using iPSCs and then directly differentiate them to make this construct. And so first, on the left side, you see a full patch with where we started printing this tissue-engineered construct on top. And we want to see, could we implant this patch? So here is the implanted version of this. This is actually a beating heart. So sorry, this is a bit bloody. This is a pig. So a pig heart that was punctured, a hole was put into the heart, and then we implanted it to see if it could survive the process, if it could be strong enough, and if it could seal the heart as well. So this is something that we're doing at the moment to understand from a clinical perspective, and maybe also from the perspective of you don't easily get funding for a lot of the research that we're trying to do to build robots, but we very easily get funding if we work towards a medical application. I will get to this later, but this is a very unfortunate situation in this case. So going towards the final piece of ASIA is getting more interested in the question of can we actually do co-culturing of a neuromuscular tissue. This was also very much inspired when Ritu came to visit us, I think it was already a year or so ago, a year or two ago, of the question of can we actually start developing platforms where we have neuromuscular tissue coming together. And so she's looking into this question of can we make a platform where we would have co-cultured both the neurons and also the muscle tissue, because eventually the question is can we actually control it through motor neurons instead of using direct broad fields stimulation. So there's lots of open questions in this field. How can we use crystallography, how we can print whatever cell we want, how we can print multiple cell types, how we can adapt the hydrogels to make them work for us, how we can even change the types of cells we're using, from where we're taking them, and eventually getting redefined features with these printing processes and pushing the limits. But so let me now take a shift. We are really a long way away from using a single small muscle to build such a large construct like a big full robot. So because of this, I have not fully put my eggs into just one basket, but we're looking into the direction of making robots also from non-living artificial muscles. And one of the works that we recently worked on was using something called HASELs. These HASELs are so-called hydraulically amplified self-healing electrostatic actuators. The way they work is you can think of them as a capacitance that is made of a flexible material. And as you're applying a high voltage to them, these electrodes will zip and will cause the liquid to move to one side of a pouch. The liquid itself in there is a dielectric liquid, so there's no charge traveling through it. And the film that's shown here in blue is also a dielectric material. So no charges are traveling from the positive to the negative side of this electrode. So here's a simple demo that we set up to just show it a bit more clearly. You see there is a slightly faint as an electrode put on top of this. This is just a carbon layer. And then when you apply a voltage to it, it contracts and then makes this thing lift up a weight. The first thing we tried is we made a little fish. Obviously because we like fish in some way. And we like something that can swim. And so we started doing a fish here, and we put 2 of these muscle films in it. But the big problem here still was there's still a wire to the external power source, right? So it's nothing embedded yet. It's not a robot that swims by itself. And then we started first looking into how can we build more interesting systems before we start tackling the power source issue. So one of the things that we want to look at is the question of what if I build a robot using antagonistic pairs of muscles instead of using electromagnetic motors. So here we took a leg design, which is, we call it a joint-centered system design, where we have electromagnetic motors, direct drive motors in each joint, and they have an encoder on each of them. So this is a design you're very used to in robotics. And then we took the musculoskeletal system design, where we took pairs, we built pairs of these electrohydraulic muscles and let them contract with tendons and move the leg around. And so now the equivalence of what we see here is we have an electromagnetic motor using electromagnetic principles, causing these rotations using metal and magnets. And on the other side, we have this polymer-based muscle with self-sensing capacity. Then the joint angle encoder gets replaced with the capacitance measurement possibility of the muscle. And finally, the linear transmission gets replaced with the nonlinear moment arms of this leg. So that means we now build a leg design where we actually have muscles contract, pull on tendons, and apply at the right moment arm to move it around. So here, this is the first demonstrator where we tried this out. So we have a hip flexor and hip extensor. We have a knee extensor and a knee flexor. And we are supplying this from multiple high voltage power supplies. And we are varying the amount of muscle density that we have depending on how much force we need for each of these muscles. So something to remember here, if you serially stack the pouches of the HASEL, you get more strain. If you put more of them parallel, you get more force. But it doesn't scale linearly, I can tell you this, because the problem here is the strain range of the muscle is very hard for each muscle, if you start adding them together, to match them with each other to actually get one unifying strain range. That's just, it's a manufacturing accuracy in some way, but we couldn't just take one muscle, characterize it, and make it 10 times and get 10 times the force. It was more like 10 muscles was about 6 times the force. So you cannot just go greedy and make a really big muscle. It will not scale the way that you might think, but we can improve this, and we'll get to later what we can do there. So hip flexion means the tip of the robot will move like it's shown here in orange. Knee extension means it moves further, as shown in green. And then hip extension and knee flexion is the same thing. You can do a full cycle this way. If I just open loop control the muscle this way, it will do the cycling move. So now we looked into 4 things that we could do with this. One of them was looking at agility. The other one was adaptivity, energy efficiency, and self-sensing. We wanted to, this was our 4 sort of areas we were curious about to see how well would that work. So starting with agility, and maybe I'll just show this to you with this video. When we start looking at agility, the experiment that we did was basically to say, we start with the second thing. The first thing we did is here, we put this design onto a little lab garden, we would call it. We stole some plants from our office and we put it into our lab garden. And then you see up in the top, this is our open loop signal that we're controlling here to do the actuation. Then we start looking at how fast can we run this whole thing. And so this is 3 hertz, and this is in slow motion. And we looked at how much of a motion range we get from this. And then if I go further, I can actually run this thing all the way up to, and let me maybe put the sound on. This is at 10 hertz. So you can run this thing up to 10 hertz of speed. And then when we looked at the efficiency of the system, we actually got no heating of the muscle with a thermal camera. While if I look at the electromagnetic leg, it's heating a lot because it's constantly running different currents through it. So then here is the final piece, which is probably a quite interesting piece, is we can also do self-sensing, as I mentioned it before. So here's the robot. The robot moves forwards with a certain gait. And once it hits the obstacle, we sense the change in capacitance, and we change the gates that we are applying. And that gate means it just becomes a hopping gate. So here it goes in. You see a capacitance curve. It changes. And then we change the gate. The controller switches, and we go forward in a different way. So you can basically do this in this way. You can also start looking into different hopping modes. So this is like a hopping mode, the speed mode that we have. You can also do distance mode. This is the longest stride you can take. And we can also do efficiency mode. So we can, this is the most efficient hopping locomotion. And the most efficient locomotion is now coming, this one. But it's a bit of cheating, I would say, because we don't really get over any obstacle, right? Here we actually are just crawling along the floor. This doesn't really do locomotion for us. So we looked at the cost of transport and compared this to other animals and robots, and it was doing quite well in that context. So slightly shifting towards Jorge, she's another PhD student in the group, we start looking into, can we actually use this to investigate learning the dynamics of the system? Can we learn the dynamics of this leg? And can we learn, for example, how to make it then afterwards hop forward and backwards? And then eventually we need this to also build a quadruped. We need to have a model of these legs and of these musculoskeletal legs to do this. And similarly, we could do the same thing for other types of robots using the same methods. And that's what Jorge is currently interested in. So stay tuned. This is still work in progress. But we will soon be able to have more on this. Another thing that we've already been starting looking into is the idea of we want to make a stretchable electrohydraulic muscle. And this one is currently not stretchable. It's a polymer film that's flexible but not stretchable. So this is bad. If I have 2 of them together, I get no elongation if I fully taut the tendons. So if I want to move at all, I need to put some slack in the tendons, but that means I lose performance. So what we did, and what we proposed here, basically, we made a combined unit of a HASEL muscle with an electrostatic clutch. With this, we have both the muscle contracting and also the clutch can be engaged and disengaged. So if I pull my arm in, the other one would open up the clutch. And if I let go, the other one would pull back, and the clutch here would open up. So this way, I can get a much larger motion range of having a muscle with the clutch than without the clutch. So I was mentioning also the problem of power supplies. This was the elephant in the room that I didn't show you yet. Here is the elephant. So the elephant is huge, right? And the problem here really is that the community that builds these things has never tried to build HASELs. Like, this is not, like, the power electronics community has not thought about this. And Kevin, you know about this problem. Like, they have not really started building power supplies that actually are compact and small. So one thing we've tried to do is to say, can we start building a power supply that works on our dimension for our problem? So for our low voltage muscles that I will show in a second, we thought about the idea, can we actually make a low voltage muscle that can use off-the-shelf MOSFETs at a range that is reasonably actuatable? So here, we were about able to do a 5 times smaller design, and it was working just fine for our robots. But in order to achieve this, we had to abandon the HASEL design. The HASEL design itself uses an electrode, and it uses a material called BOPT. BOPT is a polymer with a fairly low dielectric constant. But in order to put any forces out of this, you need to go high in voltage. And then we cannot use MOSFETs and other devices in our power supplies. So in order to go low in the voltage, we started combining something called a PVDF polymer, which is shown here in red, with the BOPT. The BOPT here, can you guess why we have the BOPT? Like, why don't we just take the HASEL design, replace BOPT with PVDF polymer, which is this acronym here. That's the way of saying it. Any idea? Okay, I might have lost you already a couple of slides earlier. But like we tried that first. Like, we tried to use PVDF polymer, put the electrode on it. The PVDF polymer is too soft. So it cannot act as a muscle. It would structurally not survive the forces that we want to apply. So now we basically separated the two things. We separated the thing that we need for electrostatic forcing to do the zipping from the structural, so by just putting the BOPT on the outside. The little bit tricky part here is, well, previously we could just buy those BOPT sheets and so forth. Here we have to cast all of it, and that's a bit more difficult. If you have ever done any dielectric elastomer actuator casting, so you know what that means. So now here you get the idea. So we have this half actuator, we call it. Half is an acronym that contains the word low voltage in it. And here is an example of running it at 1.1 kilovolts. This is a single unit that is sort of zipping and pulling up. And as the voltage goes on, it pulls up the weights and it pushes the liquid inside to the different direction. Here is an etched image where you see the top layer here. That's the high energy density dielectric, the PVDF polymer. It's about 4.8 micrometers. I find this a very interesting image because it gives you an idea of the dimensionality of these actuators. So that's actually the function layer up there. And then you can barely see the electrodes. The electrode in this case is aluminum. It's this tiny little thin line that is below the resolution of what I'm even indicating here. And then underneath is the 12 micrometers of BOPT. So we couldn't make this too thick, otherwise it would stiffen up the muscle too much. Also not too thin, otherwise it wouldn't be strong enough. So the nice thing with this design is that we actually ended up having a design that provided us with a high average specific power output while we could stay in the very sweet spot of low voltage regime. Okay, you might not think that 1.5 kilovolts is a low voltage, but the industry norms say that 1.5 kilovolt is the range where low voltage begins. So that means there's very much more relaxed regulations on building actuators with this voltage. And we are operating at milliamps here. Okay, we're operating at ranges of a few watts of powering actually. So the nice thing is that we're working much better. You don't even see the graph for the HASEL. The HASEL is here in blue. It goes somewhere over there. So at 8 volts, at 8 kilovolts, it will be as high as what our half design is. So this is a few examples. You probably were waiting for this to just show you how this looks like. So on the top, Stefan is actually now able to touch this actuator because the HASEL designs before were always an exposed electrode. He couldn't touch it because he would get an electroshock, and not like he would get a little zap. If you're ever curious to see how that goes, we had a film team come not too long ago to the lab from our collaborator to look at the electrohydraulic leg, which was built with a HASEL technology where the electrodes are exposed. And Toshi, one of the students that worked on it, in the rush of making the film team happy, had not turned it off and touched it. And you see him getting zapped and walking away and like cursing. Like it doesn't kill you, but it's not nice to touch this thing. So actually what kills you in this case is the current, it's not the voltage, okay? So the same way you probably don't want to touch your electromagnetic motor because it has a high current on it. Here you don't have to actually be worried, but it was nice to make a covering on it because we could put the first time the fish into water because the electrodes are not exposed anymore. The fish I showed you earlier I didn't tell you this, it was swimming in oil with the HASEL design. So this is just a few things that we're looking in, and there's a lot of open challenges. I don't want to not tell you them. One of them is we're currently still running this PVF topolomer with something called bipolar actuation. So we are triggering a voltage change when we're actuating it, so to remove charge retention. Otherwise, this topolomer has charge retention in material, and we're trying to figure out how to get rid of this charge retention. We're also looking at the self-sensing challenge due to hysteresis. So we're using self-sensing in there. The PVF topolomer, because of the charge retention, has more hysteresis. And they are much harder to manufacture because we can't just buy films. We have to do it all in our lab. And they are also still not as reliable, and we have to move the processes to the clean room. But so with this being said, I just want to tell you also what we can do if we're not just looking at muscles, but if we look at other parts of the musculoskeletal system. We need to produce the rest of this too. We can either assemble it all, or we could print it all in one shot. For example, in our hands. If I look at the human hands, it's amazing. I mean, it can do all of these great things, and it's really difficult to build anything like this, but we always want to aspire to this in some way. So what do we have in there? We have muscles, we have bends, we have bones, we have ligaments, we have joints. We have a lot of different elements. How do we co-produce them all at once? Thomas said, OK, let's take a scan of my hands. We take that scan, we get my skeleton out, he gets the skeleton out of the hand. Then he starts putting around tendons. He puts around a capsule, he puts around ligaments, and then he additionally puts some pressure sensor units on it. And while he was at it, he also thought, let's make a heart and let's make a walker, okay? But so just to showcase the idea of printing soft and richer materials in one print shot. So here you see, and this is together with Wojciech Matusik, who just walked in. Hey, Wojciech. So this was a work where we then basically took multiple print heads, and we have a print bed, and that print bed is allowing us to print multiple materials, for example, a soft elastomer and a rigid elastomer. And with this, you can see we can print a hand, we can print a heart, a walker, and other materials. And really the important thing here to take away from this, why is this important, or why we believe this is important? We basically went away from a method that would traditionally require a scraper and no camera that afterwards scan each layer, but you have a scraper, and that only works for a certain chemistry. If you use a chemistry that cannot properly cure, you have a problem. Here we use a vision system where we put down the droplets layer by layer. On each layer, we look at the layer and the unevenness, and then with that unevenness understood, we print the next layer to adjust for the unevenness. And this allows this process to use no more scrapers to level out each layer. And here you can see you can print a hand with wax support underneath. And this allows us to basically do a closed-loop printing process where we go from the design, we slice it into its layers, and then we can do a vision-based closed-loop feedback control system. So why is this nice? We can abandon acrylates. Acrylates is if you ever use the Stratasys polyjet system, like an edgeless material or Tango Black, you try to print something soft in there. It uses acrylates. They are chain growth polymers. They're polymerized the moment you shine UV light on them. They get pretty hard already. And the moment you stop shining UV light, they're already pretty much done with their polymerization. And you can scrape them off. It doesn't goo up your plates. So you can't do the same thing with silenes and epoxies. With silene and epoxies, they have something called a step growth polymer process. They have a more regular backbone from a chemical perspective in the way they're cross-linking. And they take time. So you cannot scrape them off, but they are much better in their material properties. So like an epoxy or the silene, we could actually build materials that have very much better aging properties, meaning they will not change their elastic modulus or their elongation at break over time. So while the other materials that you would use would just change those properties. And we also have a much smaller hysteresis. That means if you push this material, it will go back into its shape. It will not stay in this indented shape for a certain amount of time and slowly come back to its original shape. Oh, I see also Joshua is back there too. He was also part of this. Hi. And then we have a walker where we showcase that we can put the hard and the rigid materials, the soft and the rigid materials together and have a little sensor unit in the front that uses pressure-based sensing. And then it can pick up, for example, a Tic Tac box. A little fun fact, we were forced by the journal to redo this experiment because we had the label of Tic Tac on there. So they were not happy about this, so we had to redo the experiment without the Tic Tac label. Anyways, we also made a hand, as I was trying to tell you in the beginning. We made a hand where we printed also the ligaments and the tendons. They were all co-printed. And at the bottom, we put motors on it to pull on them. So I wasn't very happy that we used motors for this. So Thomas then also went ahead together with Stefan and made a unit where they put muscles on it. And this allowed us to then also show that we could actually pull at least this design using a muscle with this fishing line. So now I've talked a lot about printing them. After Stefan, who's doing the assembly right here, was done with this, he was like, I don't want to work anymore on this intricate design of printing it all. I'm actually quite convinced that I can move even faster by abandoning this idea again and make a hand, and this is the 5-hand here. So the 5-hand that you see right here is actually printed with FDM printers and casted silicon pieces and ligaments to make a hand that we can use to do some manipulation with. And here, this was just a reinforcement learning-based method where we, this was an ISAC gym, we trained a policy, and then we actually used this on the hand to show that we can do ball forward rolling and backward rolling in a controllable manner. And what we're getting more interested in at this point is the question of, can we also use other machine learning approaches that the community has been developing to, for example, mess around with the robot. So the robot is, for example, using the octopus and is supposed to plant it in there, and Elvis is annoying the robot that this is not possible, that he put it there and he moves the tray around. And here the idea is that we use a few human demonstrations to teach the learning algorithm to actually eventually learn how to place it there. So if you're curious about this, there is a startup that came out of this idea. It's Mimic, and the guys from Mimic, they are, okay, this is a video. They are actually hiring, so I just was told I should mention this briefly. so this is a startup came out of the lab, and they are actually working on this idea of commercializing the AI solution to doing manipulation using an imitation learning approach. So now looking towards what is next to do, one very interesting question that we have to think about is the tactile feedback. So have you seen this video before? Yeah, you've seen it before. So this is a study that was done many years ago in Sweden, where this user here got her fingertips numbed, and she was trying to pick up a match. And she has a very hard time to just do this very fine, precise manipulation because she doesn't feel it. So all she can do is she can just use her eyes to look at it. And it's quite challenging to do it. So eventually she manages to. She would have not managed if she wouldn't have her healthy eyes. But this allowed her to really do it. And so I feel like there's something to be said about tactile sensing in our hands. So we really need to look into this. I have one student, her name is Jana. She's starting to look more into this question of, like, can I put sensing into our hands? And can I make robot hands that have a skin with built-in sensing? So she's putting sensing skin on it. And she's using this, for example, initially do some k-means clustering to understand how different objects that she's grasping with the sensing that she gets from them fall into different clusters in this clustered space. Another thing we are looking a lot into is trying to understand how to build these hands in a more compact, but also in a more affordable design. So here, lots of pain. There were even a few iterations in between. And we have a whole class ongoing. It's called Real-World Robotics. You can look it up, where master students are just trying to build robotic hands. It's a really fun topic. People love it. And Ronan is the one that's leading this project right now in the lab. And we are looking into the questions of how to design them, what's to use for the skin, how to make it more compact, because eventually you want to put muscles into this robot, not use motors anymore. So another thing I would like to mention is, if I take a step away from the robotic embodiment towards the world around us, there's also softness there, and we haven't quite understood that softness yet. So how can we sense the world around us? One way is to start poking at the world. So here we have a robot with a rigid end effector, and we poke at the objects, and then we record the deformation. And this allows us to look at a lot of deformable objects. We took whatever was very deformable lying around, so what we could get, and we started poking at it. And by poking at it and started recording it with a very high resolution, we could build up a data set that you can now use to, for example, start learning machine learning algorithms that could look at an object and predict its mesh just based on this training. So if you're curious about this, this is still work under review at the moment, but we have it on archive. If you're curious, you look it up, please. This is a point cloud sequence and an image sequence, and also the robot data sequence of poking. And this allows us to reconstruct meshes. And so if you want to look at this, we're very happy if you want to ask us for certain embodiments that we should scan with the system that we have and put into this data set. So I cannot cover all the things that I have brought with me today, but maybe one last thing to say, ETH is a great playground for also working with students. The students are excellent, and this is just one of the examples where for the last 4 years I've been working with a team of initially bachelor students who did sort of a capstone project with us. It's called a focus project. And they have been pushing at this, and at this point, we've really gotten this project called Raptor, from soft manipulation from air towards the point of actually not just doing it in the motion capture area, but actually also taking it outside into the wilds. So you see this here in a moment. It should come up. So we actually were able to fly this up on Höngerberg, which is our outside campus, and start doing also manipulation outside, all with onboard perception stack, to do manipulation with this robot. So this is something I did have just purely master students work on this, and they did an amazing job of pushing the limits on this. So to summarize, thank you for all the time that you gave me to talk today. We have talked a bit about biohybrid swimmers, muscles, musculoskeletal legs, and also about these half actuators that put the voltage lower while keeping the performance towards the vision-controlled shedding that allows us to print integrated systems all in one shot. Finally, to talk about the abilities of using this system in an autonomous learning environment. And some of the challenges I think ahead is on the biohybrid side, we will focus a lot on the question of how to do perfusion of muscles, how to model these muscles, and then put proprioception into these robotic systems and eventually show that we can do real-world autonomy. Because if I don't have a real-world autonomy demo for you, you will probably not believe me that a musculoskeletal system is better than a non-musculoskeletal system. So with this, I want to just quickly do the advertisement of the most amazing place to work in, which is, guess what? It's Switzerland, I would say. I'm originally not from Switzerland. I came there because they gave me a job offer, and it's a really great place to be in. This was our recent lab outing this summer, and it's just always a fun place. So whenever you do not work, you go in the mountains and go for a hike or rock climbing or whatever you like. So again, this is the team that did all the work. It was all the biohybrid people you see up in the top, the electric muscle people on the center, and the people working on the modeling and the machine learning on the bottom. And this is our funding sources. So to give you an idea, we don't have NSF, we don't have NIH, we have other funding sources. And there are plenty of them. And if you're interested in applying, for example, to multi-funding sources between the Swiss National Science Foundation and the NSF in the US, there are also opportunities to do that. So with this, I'm open for questions. Thank you very much.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Is there any questions from the audience?
Hey, one thing I was really interested in is your kind of training policies for multiple different parts of the body, right? You've got soft hands and you've got legs that you're kind of training individually.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on how you might combine all those different policies into a full body model once you get to the stage of working with a full humanoid or a full fish or whatever?
The answer is I haven't thought about this too much yet, because we already have an interesting challenge to just do multitask manipulation with the hands. I would say from the modeling perspective, we're building these multi-physical models for one of the reasons is just simply better understand why the muscles behave in a certain way, or why the musculoskeletal system, the muscle and the articulated body around behaves in a certain way. It's slow. That simulation is quite data intensive, but it allows us to collect data, and you can eventually then also train surrogate models that could then speed up that process. And then that could also be used potentially as a baseline or as an underlying part for a more complex policy learning. I mean, one of them is modeling, the other one is policy learning, right? You're asking about policy learning, I think the methods that we currently see that work for, let's say, two-finger grippers, they don't directly translate to multi-fingered hands as easily. and they probably don't directly translate to a full body manipulation control. So at the moment, this is an open field, like doing proper both manipulation and walking around. And I think a big limitation is just we don't have the right platforms to even try it out. Like you could do it in simulation, right? And I think you can try it already out in simulation. I don't have anyone working on that. But I think it's a very important topic. So you're saying, yeah, this is something you could write a really nice paper on if you figure out one controller that can be learned maybe in a nice Machoko environment with a humanoids that can do both manipulation and locomotion.
Great, thanks. Awesome talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, I like the work on the HASELs and the halve actuators.
Yeah.
It seems like an interesting direction for untethering systems with somewhat compliant or soft actuation. So with the halve systems, as I understood, decreasing the voltage to the level like 1 kilovolt allows you to have sort of a compact onboard power source.
Yeah.
Yes. I guess, and it looks like pretty high power density based comparing to human muscle. It's like half of a human muscle power density, so it's not so bad.
Yeah.
What is left? What's like stopping you from maybe it's just time, but what is left to apply this in like an entire robot?
Two things. One, we want to make them more reliable, so we can run them at millions, tens of millions cycles. Kevin is also very interested in this because getting these electric muscles to work reliably enough that you can say I have something that I could give this to machine learning scientists and they could fly around with this or walk around with this and do something. That's still a challenge, particularly if you work with new materials. And then you have to do very custom processing techniques where, say, I code them in my lab instead of an industrial manufacturer has a clean room set up, perfect line, minimal error, and there's no sort of variance in the fabrication, therefore no breakdown in the voltage and so forth. So this is one big challenge. The other challenge is, and that's actually related to this, is the question of, on the lab level, I just can't make as many muscles as I can just go and order Dynamixel from somewhere, right? So that's another thing that's holding us back.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably have time for one or two more questions. Any more questions from the audience?
Back down.
Okay, yeah, please just stop.
Say you do, like, once you have, like, a full robot using the stuff that you use, which is really, really cool from your talk, how do you think, like, what advantages do you see, like, something that has soft actuation or this kind of muscle structure as compared to the hard metal robots that we're seeing right now? Like, in addition to maybe just like more safety, do you see it being able to use less power or being more reliable, being more fault tolerant? What are some of the things in that direction?
So I think primarily there is, you could argue from a mechanical perspective that I have a better matching of the mechanical impedance of the musculoskeletal robot towards the environment it's working with. The whole world is built around we using it, like the world that is curated around for us, like tools that we have, the buildings that we have. It's all made to operate with the forces and the compliance that we have as a human. A robot doesn't operate at that level. It's way stiffer. It's way less compliant. It's very payload capable, potentially. But also, it's not very good, for example, in holding weights because the motor would constantly hold a current, run a current to hold it. So I think there's multiple perspectives. On the one side, I think a musculoskeletal design, if you operate with on the level of bones and not of steel, which is an order of magnitude different in its Young's modulus, then, and actually we don't need that stiffness. I think bones are perfectly all right. It's a kind of a metamaterial. If you design it properly, it can be very lightweight. It can therefore also make for more energy efficient robots. And at the same time, it can also be less scary. I mean, I could go on, but like this is sort of the direction. So mechanically, you could argue from it from an efficiency perspective. Biohybrids have that potential of if we figure it really out, we have something that's actually sustainable. So using an organic material. And if this organic material is not needed anymore because the robot is broken or old, I just let it decay. And I don't have to worry about the epoxy-coated electronics anymore and all of these other things that we would have with a non-bio approach. So I think there is mechanical perspective, there's all this potential from, let's say, a sustainability perspective and so forth.